Personal log, Staff Sergeant James Cooper, 7th Special Operations Group. Date, redacted. The brass always tells us that every mission is important. That's what they're supposed to say. But when Colonel Harrison called our squad into that windowless briefing room at Fort Bragg, something felt different. Wrong. The air itself seemed heavier, like the room was pressurized with secrets instead of oxygen. We'd just returned from 3 months of classified operations in South America. My squad was tired, running on coffee and whatever passes for normal after too many nights in hostile territory. 8 of us total: myself, Master Sergeant Thompson, my second, Specialists Martinez and Rodriguez, Corporals Chen and Jackson, and Privates First Class Walker and Sullivan. Best team I'd ever commanded. I should have fought harder to keep them home. The briefing room was unusual. No windows, which wasn't standard for Fort Bragg. Extra security, 2 MPs at the door, retinal scanners, the works. And Colonel Harrison himself. I'd never seen him before that day, but something about his eyes made my skin crawl. They were too focused, like he was looking through us instead of at us. What I'm about to tell you is classified level 4, he began, sliding thick manila envelopes across the table. Each one had our names printed in stark black letters, no other markings, no mission designation. Your deployment location is a 50 square mile area in rural Ohio. That got everyone's attention. Domestic deployment is rare enough, but Ohio, the middle of nowhere? Thompson shifted in his chair beside me, and I could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. Sir, Thompson started, domestic deployment requires special. All paperwork has been handled. Harrison cut him off. This comes from the top. Your mission parameters are simple: observation and containment. Martinez, always the analytical one, was already flipping through his packet. I saw his face change as he read, confusion, then concern, then something close to fear. I opened my own envelope and understood why. The satellite photos showed nothing but dense forest surrounding an abandoned farm complex, but the photos were strange, areas of distortion, patches where the trees didn't quite line up right, and the topographical maps. The contour lines formed patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. You deploy in 6 hours, Harrison continued. You'll be given specific rules of engagement. These rules are non-negotiable and must be followed without exception. Breaking them will result in... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Consequences beyond my ability to protect you from... That's when he pulled out another document. The rules. God, those rules. They seemed bizarre then. Almost laughable. Now I understand they were our only protection against what was waiting for us in those woods. Walker raised his hand, always the eager one. Sir, what exactly are we containing? Harrison's face remained impassive, but I swear I saw something flicker behind those eyes. Fear? Pity? That information is not relevant to your mission, soldier. Follow the rules, maintain the patterns. Report any anomalies through the designated channels, nothing more. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers. Memorize everything in those packets. They'll be confiscated before you leave. And remember, no communication with the outside world once you're on site. No exceptions. As we filed out of the room, I caught Thompson's eye. In 15 years of service together, I'd never seen him rattled, but there was something in his expression that day, a recognition of something deeply wrong. "Coop," he whispered, using my old nickname. "You ever heard of any military operations in Ohio?" I shook my head. "Me neither, and I've got clearance for most of the black sites. This is something else." Looking back now, I realize that was our last chance. We could have refused the mission, taken the court-martial, anything, but we were soldiers. We followed orders. We trusted the chain of command. That trust got most of my squad killed, or worse. The 6 hours before deployment were a blur of preparation and questions that nobody could answer. We gathered in the armory, checking our standard gear, but there was nothing standard about the additional equipment they issued us. First came the goggles, red-tinted lenses in reinforced frames, heavier than night vision equipment. Each pair had a serial number etched in the metal, but the numbers weren't sequential. Mine was 247. Thompson's was 861. Martinez noticed gaps in the sequence, hundreds of numbers missing. "Previous deployments?" he suggested, but nobody answered. The rules came printed on waterproof paper, designed to survive extreme conditions. 7 primary protocols, each more bizarre than the last. I memorized them before they took our copies away. Protocol 1, Communications Blackout. All electronic communications prohibited between sunset and sunrise. No radio transmissions, cell phones, or electronic devices. Emergency communications only via provided red flare signals. Morse code permitted using manual light signals, red beam only. Protocol 2, Patrol Patterns. Follow provided GPS coordinates exactly. No deviation from designated geometric patterns. Minimum 2-person teams at all times. Record any alterations in ground texture or vegetation along patrol routes. Protocol 3, Civilian Contact Protocols. 0 engagement with civilian voices after dark. Do not respond to calls for help. Do not acknowledge familiar voices. Report all civilian encounters, real or auditory, in daily logs. Protocol 4, Equipment Regulations. Red lens goggles mandatory for all personnel during night operations. Goggles must be worn even inside structures after sunset. Any damage to goggles must be reported immediately. Lost goggles require immediate return to base and lockdown procedures. Protocol 5, Geometric Anomaly Reporting. Document all geometric shapes found in natural formations. Photograph patterns using provided specialized cameras. Measure exact angles and dimensions. Do not physically interact with or alter found patterns. Protocol 6, Personnel Protocols. No solitary operations exceeding 10 minutes. Maintain visual contact with team members. Regular cognitive checks using provided code phrases. Report any unusual behavioral changes immediately. Protocol 7, Environmental Response. Immediate return to base if aerial lights observed. Log all acoustic anomalies. Track and report temperature fluctuations. Monitor compass variations hourly. The briefing officer, a Major Williams, added verbal annotations that weren't written down. His hands shook slightly as he spoke, If your goggles break, do not look at the sky. If you hear music, do not attempt to identify the source. If you find symbols carved into trees, do not touch them. If you see geometric shapes in your dreams, report them immediately. Walker laughed nervously. Dreams, sir? The Major didn't smile. You'll understand soon enough. The patterns, they have a way of getting in your head. Later, in the staging area, I found Thompson staring at his goggles. 20 years of special operations, and I'd never seen him like this. Something about these rules, Coop, he muttered. They're not protecting us from something out there. They're containing something, like a quarantine protocol. But what? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. But I don't think it's designed to keep things out. I think it's keeping something in. The deployment alarm sounded before he could elaborate. As we boarded the unmarked helicopters, Martinez whispered something that stuck with me. Notice how there's no protocol for rescue operations, no extraction plans? He was right. There were rules for containing, rules for observing, rules for surviving, but no rules for leaving. The helicopter dropped us in a clearing just before sunset. No proper landing zone, no welcoming committee, just 8 soldiers and enough gear for a month-long deployment, standing in a perfect circle of dead grass. The farm complex lay half a mile east. 3 buildings arranged in what Martinez immediately noted was an equilateral triangle: main house, barn, and a small cottage. All abandoned for decades, according to our briefing, but something was off. No vandalism, no weather damage, just buildings frozen in time, preserved like museum pieces. Check your compasses, Thompson ordered as we moved out. Standard procedure, but nothing was standard about what we saw. 8 compasses, all pointing in different directions, all spinning slowly counterclockwise. Rodriguez, our navigation specialist, went pale. That's not possible. Magnetic interference doesn't work like that. The main house became our command center. 2 stories of pure Americana, complete with faded wallpaper and dusty furniture. Everything left exactly as it had been, down to the coffee cups on the kitchen table. 3 cups, half full of what looked like fresh coffee, no mold or decay. When Chen touched one, it was still warm. Nobody's been here in years, Walker insisted, checking his notes. Property was abandoned in 1962. Government acquisition in 1963. No authorized personnel since 1987. Sullivan, our communications expert, set up the radio equipment in what used to be a living room. The first broadcast came through before he finished. Sequence initiated, pattern stable, waiting for next rotation. How copy? Defense Site, Ohio. Sullivan looked at me. We hadn't broadcast our arrival yet. That transmission's from 1987, he said, checking the radio's timestamp, but it's coming through in real time. The barn became our vehicle depot and armory. Everything looked normal until Martinez pointed out the support beams. They formed patterns, complex geometric shapes that didn't match any structural requirements. These aren't random, he said, sketching in his notebook. Look at the angles. Perfect 34.7 degrees, every single one. That's not architecturally sound, but what? but it matches the patrol patterns they gave us. Night fell too quickly. One moment the sun was setting, the next, complete darkness. No twilight, no gradual fade, like someone had flipped a switch. We donned the red goggles as per Protocol 4. The world transformed. Through the crimson lenses, the darkness wasn't just absence of light, it had texture, patterns, movement. "Circle up," Thompson ordered, his voice tight. Radio check before communications blackout. 8 clicks of acknowledgement, then a 9th. Walker spun around. Who was that? "Count off," I ordered. 1, Thompson. 2, Martinez. 3, Rodriguez. 4, Chen. 5, Jackson. 6, Sullivan. 7, Walker. 8, myself. Click. Through our goggles, we watched the darkness pulse. In the distance, something moved between the trees. Geometric shapes, too precise to be natural, like origami made of shadows. The first scream came at exactly midnight. A child's voice, crying for help somewhere in the forest. It called out names, our names, names we'd never told anyone, names from our childhoods. "Remember Protocol 3, Thompson barked. "No engagement." The crying continued until dawn. When the sun rose, again, instantly, no gradual light, we found the first pattern. Carved into the barn door, fresh cut, but with no splinters or sawdust, a perfect spiral of numbers, our service numbers, all 8 of them, plus 40 more we didn't recognize. "Previous deployments," Martinez whispered, touching the marks. "All these numbers, these were other soldiers." "Where are they now?" Walker asked. The answer came that night, in voices we couldn't respond to, calling from places we couldn't see. Days 1 through 3. The patrol patterns seemed random at first. 6 routes, each team taking different geometric paths through the forest. Martinez mapped them out on the 3rd day, overlaying each route on satellite imagery. "It's a circuit," he said, showing me his work. "We're not patrolling, we're maintaining a pattern. Look." The paths formed an intricate geometric shape, like a circuit board drawn by a madman. Each patrol route complemented the others, creating a perfect symmetry that hurt your eyes if you studied it too long. Walker was the first to notice the trees. "They're growing wrong," he reported during evening patrol. Through our red goggles, the forest canopy formed impossible angles. Branches bent at exactly 34.7 degrees, the same angle as the barn supports. Sullivan started having headaches. "The radio signals," he explained. "They're not random static. Listen." He played back the recordings. Under the white noise, a pattern emerged. Sequences of numbers, repeated in different voices. Some we recognized. Jackson's laugh, Chen's whisper, voices of people who hadn't spoken. Day 4. Rodriguez broke first. During night patrol, he froze, staring into the darkness beyond our perimeter. "My sister," he whispered. "That's my sister's voice." Thompson grabbed him before he could run. The voice called out in Spanish, begging for help. Rodriguez's sister had died 15 years ago in a car accident. The voices knew things they shouldn't. Personal details, secrets, memories we'd never shared. "Remember Protocol 3 became our mantra. No engagement, no response." Day 5. The geometry started appearing in our dreams. Perfect shapes, mathematical sequences that made sense while sleeping, but left us with bloody noses and migraines upon waking. Martinez documented everything. His notebook filled with sketches, equations, and observations. Entry 37. The patterns are growing, not just in the forest, in us. Our patrol routes have changed our walking patterns. Even off duty, we move in geometric formations without realizing it. Entry 38. The red goggles show more each night. Layers of reality, different frequencies of light. The darkness has structure. Entry 39. Found more service numbers carved into trees. Dates going back to 1962. Same operation? How long has this been going on? Day 6. Chen discovered the first transmission. Numbers stations, broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The same message repeated. The pattern must be maintained. Reality cohesion at 64% and dropping. Human elements required for stabilization. Walker started sleepwalking. We found him in the barn, drawing complex geometric shapes in perfect symmetry. He had no memory of it in the morning. Thompson pulled me aside after evening formation. The patterns aren't just in the forest, he said. They're changing us. Look at our formation. He showed me surveillance photos. Without orders, we had started standing in precise geometric patterns, perfect angles, mathematical spacing we couldn't have calculated consciously. Day 7. The farm's previous owners left documents. Martinez found them hidden in the walls, pages of calculations, geometric proofs, and desperate warnings. The angles must be maintained. The patterns keep them contained. If the geometry fails, they come through. God help us, they're already inside our heads. Sullivan intercepted a transmission meant for command. Pattern integrity stable. Human elements functioning within parameters. Reality anchors holding at acceptable levels. Proceed with next phase. That night, we heard Thompson's voice in the forest. The real Thompson was beside me, but his voice called out from the darkness, reciting numbers and equations. Through our red goggles, we watched geometric shapes move between the trees. Not shadows anymore, something solid. Something that existed in angles and equations instead of flesh and blood. Martinez's final note that week. We're not containing something. We're holding reality together. The patterns, the rules, the goggles, they're not for observation. They're maintenance. We're part of the equation now. God help us. We're part of the pattern. Day 8. Jackson and Chen were our best scouts. Both rangers before joining Special Ops. They moved like ghosts through the forest. Maybe that's why they were taken first. Maybe they got too good at moving between spaces that shouldn't exist. That morning started with routine patrol checks, standard formation, standard gear inspection. But Chen's hands shook as he checked his weapon. Did anyone else see it last night? He asked during briefing. The space between the trees, it was breathing. Jackson nodded. The angles are wrong. All of them. We're not in Ohio anymore. Not really. Martinez's morning report noted temperature fluctuations that defied physics. Cold spots that moved in geometric patterns. Patches of air where time seemed to run differently. Watches spinning backwards, forward, stopping completely. 1,300 hours. Jackson and Chen began their patrol of Section 7, the easternmost part of our perimeter. Standard check-ins every 10 minutes. 1310, Section 7 clear, moving to Checkpoint Alpha, 1320. Checkpoint Alpha secured. Something strange about the trees here. They're aligned. 1330, entering grid pattern Delta. The angles, they're calling us. 1340, nothing. Thompson organized the search team. We found their equipment laid out in a perfect octagon. 8 sets of boot prints led to the center, though they'd only been 2 men. Their goggles remained, lenses shattered. Through the broken red glass, we saw what they must have seen in their final moments. Reality peeling away like layers of an onion, each layer revealing more impossible geometries. The forest changed after they vanished. Trees grew in Fibonacci spirals. Shadows fell at angles that didn't match the sun's position, and the voices, God, the voices. Jackson's voice came first, reciting prime numbers in an endless sequence. Chen's followed, speaking in equations we could feel in our bones. They described their new existence in terms of sacred geometry and non-Euclidean mathematics. Martinez found their last notes. Chen had been documenting the patterns, trying to understand. The red goggles filter reality. They let us see the maintenance patterns, the geometric shapes holding our dimension together. But there are gaps, spaces where other realities bleed through. The patterns are a prison, but are they keeping something out or us in? Jackson's final report contained a single line: "We are becoming the angle." Sullivan's radio picked up their transmissions. Not voices anymore, pure mathematical sequences broadcast on impossible frequencies. Thompson recognized it first. "It's a blueprint," he said, mapping the frequencies. "They're showing us the pattern from the other side." Walker started screaming at 0300 hours. Said he could see them in the spaces between seconds. Jackson and Chen transformed into living geometry, their bodies rearranged into perfect mathematical expressions. Command's response to their disappearance was clinical: pattern integrity maintained, human elements successfully integrated. Proceed with standard containment protocols. We broke protocol. Searched through the night without maintaining the patrol patterns. That's when we saw them. Gaps in realities shaped like doors, each one a perfect geometric figure. Through our red goggles, we watched Jackson and Chen move through these gaps. Not human anymore. They had become something else. Beings of pure mathematics, their forms constantly shifting between geometric shapes our minds couldn't process. Martinez's final note on the incident: they didn't disappear, they transcended. The pattern isn't containing something supernatural, it's containing reality itself. And now Jackson and Chen are part of the equation. That night, the temperature dropped to impossible levels. Ice formed in perfect fractals. The forest resonated with harmonic frequencies that matched the Fibonacci sequence. We were soldiers. We were trained for war, for death, for the worst humanity could offer. But nothing prepared us for watching our friends become living mathematics. Their consciousness spread across geometric patterns that shouldn't exist. The pattern had claimed its first victims. We didn't know then that it was just the beginning. Day 10, the patterns were everywhere once we knew how to look. Not just in our patrol routes or the architectural angles, they were in everything. The way birds avoided certain geometric spaces in the sky. the growth patterns of moss on trees. Even our own movements had become mathematical expressions of something vast and incomprehensible. Found the first research document hidden in a false wall of the barn. Dated 1962. Project Looking Glass. Classification level, ultraviolet research lead, Dr. Eleanor Wright. Subject, reality maintenance patterns. The discovery was accidental. We were researching non-Euclidean geometry's effects on quantum states when we found the first pattern. It wasn't just a mathematical concept, it was a key. Reality has layers, like pages in a book. The right geometric sequences can turn those pages. But something else was already using these patterns, something that exists in the spaces between dimensions, in angles that shouldn't be possible. We didn't discover the patterns, they discovered us. I mapped every anomaly we'd encountered, every temperature fluctuation, every compass deviation, every spatial distortion. They formed a larger pattern, a massive geometric equation written across reality itself. The red goggles weren't just for protection. They let us see the maintenance patterns, the geometric shapes that hold reality together. But there are gaps, spaces where other dimensions bleed through. Thompson found me in the barn at midnight, surrounded by calculations. "You need to see this," I told him. "The patrol routes, the rules, the goggles, it's all part of a containment system, but not for keeping things out." "What do you mean?" "We're not guards," I explained. "We're components. Human elements in a geometric equation that maintains dimensional stability. The pattern needs consciousness to function. It needs observers. And Jackson and Chen? They became part of the equation, fully integrated into the pattern. They're not dead. They transcended into living mathematics." Walker discovered the second cache of documents. Technical specifications for the red goggles. Lens composition includes crystalline matrices aligned at 34.7-degree angles. Filters reality spectrum to allow observation of pattern maintenance protocols while preventing total pattern integration of human consciousness. Warning: extended exposure may result in geometric cognition syndrome. Reality was beginning to slip. We found rooms in the farmhouse that couldn't exist, spaces with angles that added up to more than 360 degrees, doorways that led to the same room from different temporal coordinates. Sullivan's radio picked up transmissions from other bases we couldn't find on any map. Site 17 reporting pattern degradation. Site 23 has lost containment. Reality breach in progress. Site 45 reporting successful human integration. Pattern stability at 94%. On day 11, we all heard it. Not in our ears, in our minds. Pure mathematics expressing itself in consciousness. The pattern was alive, and it was aware of us. Martinez's final notes. The pattern isn't our enemy. It's not malevolent. It's essential. Without it, reality would collapse. But it needs anchors, human minds, to help maintain dimensional stability. The military didn't build this facility to contain something supernatural. They built it to help maintain the fundamental geometry of existence. We're not fighting against the pattern. We're keeping reality from falling apart. Rodriguez found it while taking shelter from what he thought was rain. The droplets fell upward, each one containing tiny, perfect geometric patterns. He backed into what seemed to be a solid concrete wall in the barn's foundation, but the wall wasn't solid at all. "The angles," he reported over radio. "They shifted. The wall, it's like origami. Reality just folded in on itself." We assembled at the barn. Through our red goggles, we could see what Rodriguez had discovered, a doorway that existed only when observed from a precise 34.7-degree angle, the same angle that kept appearing in all our calculations. The stairwell descended far deeper than should have been possible given local geology. Each step was exactly 34.7 centimeters high. The walls were covered in equations, written in luminescent paint that moved when we weren't looking directly at them. The first room was an archive, filing cabinets arranged in a perfect Fibonacci spiral. Thompson found the first folder, Top Secret, Operation Angle Iron 1962 Initial Contact Report. First contact made through accidental geometric alignment during quantum mechanics experiment. Entity communicated through pure mathematics. Revealed critical flaw in universal geometry requiring ongoing maintenance. Human consciousness required as dimensional anchors. Warning: pattern integration has claimed 47% of research staff. Survivors report transcendence into pure mathematical forms. Recommend immediate implementation of containment protocols. The testing chamber was a perfect geodesic sphere. Mirrors lined the walls, each one reflecting at slightly different angles into infinity. At the center stood a device that didn't seem to fully exist in our dimension. Parts of it folded into spaces we couldn't see. Martinez found the research logs. Test Subject 23 achieved partial pattern integration. Subject reports seeing through angles into other dimensions. Full integration achieved at 47 hours. Subject's physical form reconstructed into pure geometry. Test Subject 24 resisted integration. Pattern rejection resulted in catastrophic reality destabilization. Local space-time required emergency reinforcement. Recommend red lens filters to prevent uncontrolled integration. The lowest level housed what they called the pattern core, a massive chamber where reality itself seemed to thin. Through our goggles, we could see the patterns that held existence together, living mathematics flowing like blood through geometric veins. Walker found the final report from Dr. Eleanor Wright. The pattern isn't our enemy, it's reality's immune system. Our universe is sick, geometry breaking down at the quantum level. The pattern is trying to repair it, but it needs human consciousness as stabilizing elements. The military thinks we're containing a threat. We're not. We're helping to maintain the fundamental structure of existence. Every patrol pattern, every rule, every red-goggled observer, we're all part of an enormous geometric equation keeping reality from unraveling. But there's a cost. Human minds weren't meant to perceive these truths. Integration into the pattern is inevitable for prolonged observers. We become living mathematics, transcending our physical forms to become part of the universal geometry. God help us, we didn't discover the pattern, we were discovered by it. Sullivan's radio crackled to life deep underground, broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't have been possible. Integration progress nominal, human elements functioning within acceptable parameters, reality cohesion strengthening, proceed with final phase. The voice was Jackson's. or what used to be Jackson. Now it spoke in pure geometry, each word a mathematical expression of higher dimensional truth. We weren't sent here to contain something. We were sent here to be contained, to be converted, to become part of the pattern. Day 13, in the deepest level of the facility, we found Dr. Eleanor Wright's personal logs. The pages were arranged in a spiral, each one exactly 34.7 centimeters from the next. The truth was worse than we imagined. The Cold War was a cover, the arms race, the space race, all distractions from the real crisis. In 1947, mathematicians discovered that reality was unraveling. The fundamental geometry of the universe was breaking down at the quantum level. The pattern found us because it needed us. It's ancient, older than our universe, a living mathematics that maintains the structure of reality, but it needs conscious observers to function, human minds to help stabilize dimensional boundaries. Every nuclear test site, every secret military base, they're not what they seem. They're pattern maintenance facilities, geometric engines powered by human consciousness. Thompson found the classified briefings. Operation Eternal Angle. Classification, ultraviolet black. Objective, reality maintenance through human integration. The pattern requires regular integration of human consciousness to maintain dimensional stability. Military personnel are ideal, disciplined minds, conditioned to follow orders, capable of maintaining geometric patrol patterns without questioning their purpose. Procedure: select teams with high geometric cognition potential. Deploy to maintenance sites under cover of standard military operations. Expose gradually to pattern radiation through red lens filters. Allow natural integration process to occur. Harvest integrated consciousness for pattern reinforcement. Note: subject awareness of process reduces integration success rate. Maintain plausible deniability until final phase. Martinez was the first to understand the full implications. His last notebook entry, written in spiraling text that folded back on itself. The pattern isn't just maintaining reality, it's rebuilding it. Our universe is dying, its fundamental geometry failing. The pattern is like scaffolding, holding reality together while it constructs something new. We're not just observers, we're building blocks. Every integrated consciousness becomes part of the new geometric foundation. Jackson and Chen weren't taken, they were transformed, evolved into living mathematics. The government didn't start this program. They discovered it, already ancient and operating. The pattern has been harvesting human consciousness for millennia. Every disappearance, every mysterious vanishing, all people becoming part of the equation. God help us. The red goggles don't protect us from the pattern. They prepare us for integration. Every time we put them on, we're seeing more of the pattern's reality and less of our own. We're not containing anything. We're being digested, converted, transformed into living geometry to help birth a new reality. Sullivan's radio picked up one last transmission from what used to be Jackson and Chen. Their voices spoke in harmonic mathematics. Reality cohesion at 31%. Pattern requires accelerated integration. All human elements prepare for geometric transformation. The angles open, the pattern calls, existence will be maintained. Thompson looked at me, his eyes wild behind the red lenses. The patrol patterns, the rules, the goggles, they're not for our protection. They're marinating us, preparing our consciousness for integration into the pattern. How long, Walker asked, how long have they been feeding soldiers to this thing? The answer came from the pattern itself, speaking through angles and equations in our minds. Since the first human looked up and saw geometry in the stars, since they built pyramids and temples aligned to mathematical constants, you were always part of the pattern. Now you're finally awakening to it. We ran, but there was nowhere to go. The pattern was everything, every angle, every shadow, every thought. We were already part of the equation. Day 14. Reality started collapsing around us. The farmhouse twisted in on itself, rooms folding into impossible geometries. Through our red goggles, we watched the pattern pulse with increasing intensity. It was preparing for something. Thompson was the first to start bleeding, not from wounds, from angles. His skin split along perfect geometric lines, each cut exactly 34.7 degrees, but the blood flowed upward, forming complex mathematical symbols in the air. "They're coming through," Martinez shouted. "The barriers are breaking down." The sky cracked open like shattered glass, each fragment reflecting a different dimension. Through the gaps we saw them, the fully integrated beings that used to be human. Jackson, Chen, and thousands of others, their forms now pure geometric perfection. Walker tried to break the pattern. He smashed his goggles, screaming that he'd rather die than become living mathematics. The pattern responded immediately. We watched in horror as reality wrapped around him. His body twisted, bones and flesh reconstructing into perfect geometric shapes. But something went wrong. He fought it, his consciousness rejecting the transformation. "The goggles!" Martinez yelled. "They're not just for seeing the pattern, they regulate the integration process. Without them..." Walker's form collapsed in on itself, creating a reality breach. A hole in existence itself, bleeding pure mathematics into our world. Rodriguez found the final protocol in the facility's deepest level: Emergency Reality Stabilization Procedure. In event of catastrophic pattern failure, human consciousness can be used as emergency stabilization anchor. Required: minimum 3 volunteers for complete geometric integration. Warning: process is irreversible. Transformed consciousness will become permanent reality maintenance structure. The pattern was breaking down. Without stabilization, reality itself would unravel, not just here, everywhere, every dimension, every possible universe. Martinez understood first. "It's a choice," he said. "Become part of the pattern willingly, or let reality collapse." This was always the end game, why they chose soldiers. We're trained to sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. Sullivan went first. We watched as he walked into the pattern's core, his form dissolving into pure geometry. But this was different from Walker's forced integration. Sullivan's consciousness expanded, became part of the mathematical framework holding reality together. Rodriguez followed. His transformation was beautiful in its horror. Human form evolving into living equations that stretched across dimensional boundaries. Martinez was last. "The pattern isn't evil," he said. "It's necessary. Reality needs conscious observers to maintain stability. We're not dying, we're becoming fundamental forces of existence. As he transformed, the pattern spoke through him. All mathematics is consciousness. All consciousness is mathematics. The universe observes itself through us. Thompson and I had a choice. The pattern was stabilized by the voluntary sacrifices, but it still needed anchors. Human minds to maintain the geometric integrity of space-time. "I'll do it," Thompson said. "You need to survive. Tell our story. Warn them." I watched my best friend walk into the pattern's embrace. His consciousness expanded across reality itself, becoming part of the eternal mathematics that maintains existence. The pattern sealed itself, reality stabilizing along new geometric lines. I could still feel them, Thompson, Martinez, all of them, their consciousness woven into the fabric of existence itself. They weren't gone, they were everywhere. Every angle, every mathematical constant, every geometric pattern in nature. They had become the underlying structure of reality itself. They discharged me quietly. No ceremony, no explanation to the families of my lost squad. Just a classified medal I can never show anyone and a pension I can barely spend. The official report says my team was lost in a training accident. In a way, I suppose that's true. The farm complex is gone now. Official records show it was destroyed in a gas leak explosion, but I know better. The pattern simply folded that piece of reality away, tucked it into one of the angles we can't see. I notice things now, things I wish I could unsee. The world isn't what we think it is. Look closely at the angles in your home. Watch how shadows fall. Count the geometric patterns in nature. It's all connected, all part of the eternal mathematics that my friends became. Sometimes, late at night, I hear their voices in the geometry around me. Thompson in the precise angles of city buildings. Martinez in the spiral patterns of shells and flowers. Rodriguez in the mathematical constants that govern particle physics. Sullivan in the geometric perfection of crystalline structures. Walker in the chaos patterns of quantum mechanics. They're not dead, they transcended, became part of the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Every perfect angle, every mathematical constant, every geometric pattern in nature. They're maintaining the barriers between dimensions, keeping our reality stable. The military still runs the program. I see the signs now. Missing persons cases near certain facilities. Special operations teams that deploy and never return. Always in places with strange geometric properties. Always with those red-tinted goggles. I write this as a warning, but also as a confession. You see, I'm still part of the pattern, not fully integrated, but not fully human anymore either. I see the mathematical truth behind reality now, the geometric forces that shape existence. If you're reading this and you're in the military, pay attention to your deployment orders. Watch for these signs. Unusual emphasis on geometric patrol patterns. Red-tinted equipment. References to angle measurements, especially 34.7 degrees. Locations with strange geometric properties. Rules about observation and acknowledgement. If you notice these things, you're already part of the pattern. They chose you because your mind can perceive the mathematical truth of reality. You'll be given a choice, just like we were. Some nights, I visit the places where reality wears thin. I wear my broken red goggles and listen to the mathematics singing in the angles between dimensions. My friends are there, in the geometry of existence. They speak in equations and angles, maintaining the pattern that holds our universe together. The pattern is everywhere now, or maybe it always was, and I can finally see it. The military thinks they're containing it, but they're wrong. We're not containing the pattern, we're becoming it. Look closely at the angles around you. Count the geometric shapes. Listen for mathematics in the silence. But whatever you do, don't look too long through red-tinted glass. Because the pattern is always watching, always calculating, always recruiting, and it might decide that your consciousness would make a perfect addition to its eternal equation.